So the series I'm going to talk about today is called the Amory Wars. So here's a little background on it first. So one of my favorite bands, called Coheed and Cambria, they're a progressive rock or progressive metal band, and they're actually going to be releasing their 10th album soon. 10th. And the first 5 albums are concept albums, and they tell one big story. And albums 1 through 3 are in comic book form. Album 4 doesn't have a comic yet, but album 5 is a prequel, and that story is in not a comic but a prose novel. And it can get a little confusing. So this video is also going to be for fans of the band who are looking to dive into the band's lore. So the first album is called The Second Stage Turbine Blade. And here is the graphic novel. This is the ultimate edition. And this collects all 10 issues of the series. Well, of The Second Stage Turbine Blade, which is part 1 of the Amory Wars. Now, this is way out of print. Like, I looked on Amazon, and it's a lot of money to buy used. But if you use Comixology to read digital comics, you can get this on there. And and this is by Boom, and Comixology has a ton of sales on Boom Comics all the time. So the next album is called In Keeping Secrets of Silent Earth 3. And this is it right here. And even though there's the number 3 at the end of the title, this is part 2, because it's the second album. So you can get this in 2 graphic novels, or you can get this, the Ultimate Edition hardcover. And to me, this is easier, since it's easier for me to remember, okay, this was book 1, this is book 2. Or if I had this in the 2 graphic novels, it would kind of be a little, I mean, I understand it, but it might be a little more confusing if you just have all of part 1 or all of part 2 in one book together. So next is part 3 is called Good Apollo, I'm Burning Star 4, From Fear Through the Eyes of Madness. Crazy title, I know. So even though part of the title is I'm Burning Star 4, this is part 3. And it's the 3rd album. You can get this in 3 graphic novels, or you can get it in one like this as well. So all 3 are written by the singer and guitarist Claudio Sanchez. In part 2, which is this one, Peter David, who's known for writing like Hulk for Marvel, he writes it with Claudio. And it's kind of funny because Peter David also wrote the comic book form of The Dark Tower with Stephen King. So it looks like whenever a celebrity wants to adapt their kind of story they already did with them, they get Peter David. So Chandra Eckert helps him write part 3. So the only one where he writes the whole thing himself is part 1. And I love Claudio, but you can kind of tell because in parts 2 and 3, it feels more like how I normally read comics. Kind of like how a regular comic book is written, where part 1 kind of feels a little rushed at times, like he just wants to get everything in his head that the story is on paper. So I guess I'm trying to say is parts 2 and 3 feel a little more polished, and a little more refined. Maybe because he got a professional to work with him. But, yeah. So, I've been a fan of the band for 15 years, so I might be a bit biased compared to some readers just jumping into this for the art and story. And while listening to the music, I would always guess at what the story was, just because I didn't want to spend the money to get the books. But seeing the scenes play out on the pages makes listening to the songs a different story. Pun intended. It's like reading it was like the puzzle pieces were being put together, because the titles of the songs and the titles of the albums now make sense, and dialogue from the characters in here are actually lyrics to a lot of the songs. So the story itself is about a family. Coheed and Cambria are the names of the parents, and they have a few children who, in the grand scheme of things, are kind of irrelevant, except for one of them being named Claudio, which is also the singer of the band's name. I'm not going to get into too many specifics since there is a lot that happens. This is a long series. It's a huge sci-fi epic with like the scope of Star Wars or Dune. I'm not trying to say it's the same quality, so don't quote me as saying, oh, this is as good as Dune or Star Wars. I'm just trying to say that the scope of it, how there's all this history, there's all this lore, and Claudio really goes big with all these huge ideas. So if we're talking comics, I guess I would say it's equivalent to like Grant Morrison. But also at times he kind of throws a lot in, kind of like how Grant Morrison does, where I had to reread some stuff and I thought, wait, what's he trying to say here? Or how did this happen? Or what's the story with this character? So it kind of took a couple rereads for me to even figure out like who was lying, who was telling the truth, and things like that. I did read that Claudio is writing the next part soon, because after these three books, the album after it completes the story and is the final part. So in my head while listening to the album, I think I got the story down pat from listening to the lyrics. But when the lyricist, the singer, actually writes down the story and publishes it as a comic, I'm probably going to read it and be like, oh, that's not what I thought at all, but that's still awesome. It's kind of like how when you see a painting, like an abstract painting, and you look at it and you're like, oh yeah, I can totally tell it's this, and it evokes this kind of emotion, and then you read an interview from the painter and you're like, oh, that's not what it's supposed to be at all, but it's still cool either way. I bookmarked some pages in the graphic novel so I can show you what it looks like. Now, one thing is the art. It wasn't consistent all the way through. There were different artists in the books, so it kind of made it feel like it wasn't one cohesive thing. It kind of and it did make it feel like, oh, this is one story, this is the second story, even though it was one big story. So even though they were written, there were hiatuses, I'm trying to say. I understand why there's different artists, but it was kind of jarring and it took you out of it. But it's still good. So, part 1, the second stage Turbine Blade, the art style and even the writing style and the dialogue reminded me of like something from the late 90s from Image, kind of like Spawn or Witchblade or something like that. So here's this art. Then going into part 2, and Keeping Secrets of Silent Earth 3, the big villain of it all right there. He kind of looks like Thanos with this helmet. And here's him. It's a full page. I like that page. And then if you go to this page, I bookmarked. This is a really cool one. And it looks like something from like a Jonathan Hickman comic. And then in the last one, as of now, I really like this page. Now, in the last one, it's really dark, and small spoiler, it gets pretty meta. So, the colors in here, the coloring, there's not that much bright colors, unless it's like this, where it's fire. And, yeah, one of the characters looks like Lobo from DC. So, that's about it. I really enjoyed it, but I was thinking maybe I wouldn't have as much if I wasn't a huge fan of the band, kind of looking at it through an outsider's perspective. But I enjoyed it. It's not award worthy or anything like that. It's a big adventure. It's good to read. It was a good read. Maybe just try it out, see if you like it. I think it's on Comixology Unlimited if you have that subscription, if you want to try it out. That's about it. Have a good weekend or day or whatever.